Drafts in the rear view. Now the real work starts. For the top overall selection, there are more than enough tools to get that job done. An embarrassment of riches, both inherited and added around Caleb Williams, the former Heisman Award winner, making his way to Chicago alongside consensus All-American wideout Rome Odunze, who came off the board just 8 picks later. Our draft recap is presented by Geico. Get more with Geico. Joe Musso alongside Ryan Wilson and Rick Spielman here to dive into it all, fellas, and we're starting there at the top of the board. 1-1, Caleb Williams. Chicago, they go offense, a little third phase help, but the story here, picks 1 and pick 9. How do you grade it out, Ryan?
I'm starting with pick 22 in the 4th round, the punter. Huge development for the Iowa football program. But we have to start with Caleb Williams. We have to start with Rome Odunze because that is a franchise-changing development. You start with the franchise quarterback, you circle back and get an incredible playmaker. And Rick, we talked throughout the fall and into the pre-draft process about how good Rome Odunze was for that Washington team and how he could end up being a top 10 pick. Both things came true. Caleb was going to be the first overall forever. There was some back and forth during the fall that maybe Drake May or Jaden Daniels, but I think at the end of the day, it was a pretty easy decision for Ryan Poles. You see the picks here. Kieran Amagaje is a project at 326 coming out of Yale. Just hasn't played a lot of football, but athletically checks the box. And then they only had 4 picks, Rick, but they came back to 144 to get edge rush help because that was something we thought they might do at 9 with Austin Booker out of Kansas. You and I talked that perhaps maybe he should have returned to school, but maybe he takes a redshirt year, as you like to say, and he's their guy going into 2025. All that said, Rick, A+ for the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with you. They addressed all their needs that they had to address. They went out and got Caleb Williams, check. Rome Odunze, double check.
Oh.
And then the offensive tackle from Yale, that was a project, but it was something that they needed to develop, and they've done that because of the offensive line they currently have and the tackle they currently have up there. The punter, everybody takes a punter. I took too many punters and kickers in my day, so I ended up cutting them, and then they end up going out to be Pro Bowlers. And the last one, they moved back in, giving up a pick next year because they only had 4 picks. But when you watch this kid, he's long, he's athletic, raw, but he showed a lot of tools down at the Senior Bowl. You can see the first step quickness, you can see the length. When we looked at kids like this, our defensive line coach, Andre Patterson, used to salivate when these kids were sitting on the board. He said, I can't teach the size, I can't teach the length, I can teach the technique. And I think this guy's going to be a good player here down the road.
So for Joe, Bears fan, his edification, is it more beneficial, disregarding the financial part of it, but for Austin Booker, does he learn more as a football player year 1, watching and learning, or returning to school?
Well, I always think they should return to school because he's going to make a lot more money if he probably would have came back in the way the NIL is right now.
What about in terms of football progress, growth?
Yeah, no, he's going to grow more, probably coming to the NFL, but he's going to be a little bit less in the pocket by making that decision. And plus, he didn't have a really long track record of playing.
Right. Very few times before have I seen Bears fans rowing in the same direction, that they are right now. Positivity, not something the franchise has known all that much over these last 3 or so decades, but as you said, could be a franchise-altering draft right here for Chicago. We're trying to get more, presented by Geico. How do the Bears get more out of Caleb in year 1 under the tutelage of Shane Waldron?
Joe, knowing you for as long as I have, I am incredibly excited for you and Bears fans because it feels like they're turning the corner. And Rick, you've made selections where you thought, okay, this is going to be a difference maker year 2, 3, 4, 5 down the line. Adrian Peterson comes to mind as someone who can redirect a franchise. Justin Jefferson. But when you get that franchise quarterback, it solves a lot of problems. Patrick Mahomes hides a lot of warts. Josh Allen hides a lot of warts. And it feels like Caleb Williams and the infrastructure around him as a first overall pick, typically those situations are not very good. This feels like best case scenario for him.
Yeah, there's not a better situation that I can remember a rookie quarterback walking into with all the talent around him, with the receivers he has, the running backs, the tight ends. I mean, Gerald Everett is a signing that no one really talks about, but he is a very good receiving tight end to go along with Cole Kmet. So they are set up for success, and they're set up, like, if we looked at Bryce Young last year, the first overall pick, nowhere near the same talent that Caleb Williams is coming into with the Chicago Bears.
And almost poetically, it was his top target to be that got them that pick from the Chicago Bears. DJ Moore now a part of that arsenal in Chicago. They add to the 3rd phase with the big leg that was mentioned, and it was a top 5 scoring defense after Thanksgiving last year. We'll see how it all adds up in Chicago. But elsewhere in the North, coming out of day 1, this was the big winner for you, Rick. Minnesota They go J.J. McCarthy after failing to move up to number 3. Does that give you pause or change your grade at all that they had eyes potentially for someone else and do land on McCarthy?
No, because that happens all the time. That's why it's a draft, and it's not.
I'm sure they had eyes on Caleb Williams, but that's not going to him. You're going to downgrade him.
You can't have him.
Yeah.
Joe's eyes were.
Well, maybe 3 years you may not be saying that.
All right.
And yeah. Let him enjoy the moment, Rick, okay? It is the working man's day. I gave the Vikings an A,
okay.
And I think part of the math, and, you know, we've talked about this a lot. J.J. McCarthy, we know he wasn't asked to do a lot at Michigan, but the pieces are there, the leadership qualities are there. Last year, we talked to C.J. Stroud at the Combine, and he changed our opinion in terms of his leadership qualities because we never talked to him. J.J. McCarthy was the exact same way, and I think the added bonus is Kevin O'Connell is going to be the one coaching him up, along with Josh McCown, which you pointed out he has a relationship with. Dallas Turner, they traded up to get him. There were clips going around the internet where Kevin O'Connell was shocked that was going to be a development, one in which he was happy about. And then they just keep adding pieces, Rick. Kyrie Jackson, long cornerback out of Oregon. Walter Rouse, I thought he got better after he transferred from Stanford. And those pieces are in place. Will Reichert, who you know from Alabama, adds as a kicker. So I think they got better as a team. And by the way, it's hard to give a team an F unless they just take all long snappers. So they filled needs, and there's potential, and that's what you want to have coming out of the draft.
Yeah, and they were aggressive filling in those needs. They moved up to get J.J. McCarthy just to make sure they secured him, even though it was only one spot. They moved up to go get Dallas Turner. You know, they lost Daniil Hunter. They lost D.J. Wanham. They were able to sign Van Ginkel from Miami. They brought in Grenard from Houston. But in Brian Flores' defense, you have to have pressure on the quarterback, which can alleviate some of the pressure on the secondary, which they needed to address as well, which they did with the Oregon kid. So I think they did a great job, especially in the first round, making sure that they got the quarterback. They couldn't come out of this draft without a quarterback, and they got a legit pass rusher who I thought was the best pass rusher coming out. So that's why I think it wasn't a...
And the other reason that they're winners, if you want to call them that, they didn't have to trade the 23rd pick. We had said that for weeks, that they're going to have to trade number 11 and 23, perhaps a 25 first rounder to get up to 4 or 5. They keep 23, trade up to 17, and get Dallas Turner.
Let me ask, if that trade would have went, and supposedly it's being reported that they were going to give up 11-23 and a first round pick to go up and get a Drake May, then they wouldn't have got a Dallas Turner. Would you still give him an A?
No, and you've talked about this. If you're only giving up a first rounder for Caleb and a first rounder for Jaden, and then you're giving up 3 for whoever your quarterback is, essentially 3, 2.5, if you want to say that, that already puts you behind the 8 ball because you're getting QB 3 or 4, and then if he doesn't hit, your franchise has no assets going forward in which to get better.
Well, that was the alternate universe, the one that they live in now, still going to look a whole lot different than the Minnesota Vikings we saw a season ago, both sides of the ball there, guys. Let's get to Green Bay because this was a particularly Green Bay approach to the draft. Just one skilled player if you're not counting a flyer on a quarterback late in this draft. Young roster, very capable, very talented. We saw maybe the ceiling of that youth last year, and they're going to try and break through that, move forward. I mean, total sum of the parts here, Ryan. How do they grade out in your eyes?
Joe, when I think of With the First Pick podcast, which Rick and I do, I think of sexy. When you look at this draft board, Rick, it's not particularly sexy. Jordan Morgan, tackle guard flexibility. Edge Cooper is a special player. He was our linebacker 1. They get him at 45, and that feels like certainly he's going to fill a need there. Javon Bullard, a similar type player in that he's a nickel. He helps in the secondary. He's going to play a little behind Edge Cooper there. And you keep going down the list. They got another linebacker in Teron Hopper out of Missouri. I liked him a lot. You think he needs to use his arms more when he runs, which is a curious scouting report.
Yeah, no, he runs with his arms. He just don't take on blockers with his arms.
And then they got our guy Evan Williams. We were talking about him on day 3. Didn't test well in terms of the speed, but he's a guy that is a thumper coming downhill. And then one of my favorite players. And the overarching takeaway for me, Rick, is that they are not messing around at the second and third levels of the defense with the way they approach this draft after the first round. But Keaton Oladipo out of Oregon State, I've been talking about him for weeks and months. Again, not incredibly side to side, has the elusiveness there, but I think straight line, he's pretty good. And then finally, his name was called, quarterback Michael Pratt.
Yeah, no, this was a defense. This was a Brian Gutekunst type draft. Okay, they're not going to take the flashy skill guy on the offensive side of the ball. They're trying to secure the offensive line. They have a new defensive coordinator, and Jeff Hafley was a head coach at Boston College. They're going to go from a 3-4 to a 4-3, so from an odd to an even front. When you do that, you have to have athletes on the defensive side of the ball. So everything that they targeted in that second day on Friday were athletic players that are very good football players, and that's going to help their defense a lot, because that was a little bit of an Achilles heel till they got late in the season. That's why they made the defensive coordinator change.
I mean, I look at all these names, and it looks like competition at camp is what it looks like to me, and we'll see what the Green Bay Packers can do. This NFC North, just a few years removed from it being wide open. I mean, you got something here before we get to Detroit?
I should have led with this. I gave him an A.
You got him an A?
Yeah.
All right. The Detroit Lions, it was corner help early that they targeted in this draft. Just a couple plays, couple decisions, couple minutes away from realizing some goals that they had not ever before, Ryan. Do you feel like they've gotten closer to that being a reality with the addition of these names?
How can you not trust Brad Holmes, future podcast host with the first pick? If he keeps having the success
If he keeps doing well in the draft, he'll be sitting here in a couple years.
How can you not trust Dan Campbell? How can you not trust Chris Spielman? And the thing, Joe, last year's draft, and Rick and I talked about this last night on the podcast, they went with Jahmyr Gibbs, they went with Jack Campbell, then in the second round, Sam Laporta and Brian Branch. Those weren't necessarily needs that we thought they were going to address. Those turned out to be the right picks.
Home runs.
Similarly, home runs. Yeah. Terrion Arnold sitting there at 24. That's a home run. Ennis Rakestraw Jr. has first-round talent, but physically didn't test there. Those are home runs. And Rick, I'll ask you a question that we got last night. Did the Lions lose the draft with those first two picks?
Absolutely not. They needed corner, and that was one of their Achilles heels on the defensive side of the ball. And especially when Cam Sutton got the off-season concerns off the field, they had to release him. So they signed Mosley last year, Emmanuel Mosley, but he was hurt again, tore his ACL, I believe, twice. So they needed to get help on the defensive side of the ball. And maybe the thing that prevented them from getting the Super Bowl, besides just kick the field goal and let's move on in life, they have all these explosive playmakers on offense, but they needed to help the defense. And Aaron Glenn's got to be very happy right now. And when you look down at these lists, every single one of these football players are very good football players. They're smart, they're tough, and they're reliable. And that's what Detroit Lions always draft.
I would imagine they're good people, because that seems to be the starting point of the conversation for the Lions players.
Yeah, and they're reliable. Can you rely on them to line up week in and week out? And we saw that with the rookies last year.
A-. I need
A-.
Yes.
A-, my God.
Lest we never forget, analytics are meant to inform, not to decide. Big decisions were made.
What did you give them last year?
Over these last three.
D.
We look forward, not back, and here is what the future looks like in the NFC North. Plus 140, the Lions, the favorites, to go back-to-back in that division. The Packers next closest. A fall from grace for the Vikings, who were sort of the gatekeepers for a couple years there, or at least preseason appeared to be, and there are the Bears at plus 370, despite a rookie quarterback. More than a fighting chance to be kings of the North.